Savita, can you hear me? Are you there?
Madam, we are live now.
You're
So
live?
yeah.
Is there something wrong? I mean, am
No,
I
no, no, no.
not?
It is
Okay.
going on. You
Okay.
just type your mobile number. I'll talk to you on the phone.
Type my mobile number. On what?
Yeah. You don't speak because now you just type whatever you want to speak. Say.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Namaste.
Namaste.
Yeah.
Namaste.
So,
I joined a little bit earlier to make sure
yes.
things are
Yes.
okay. So I
So,
will,
yeah, we'll start after some time. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I will switch off my video and sound, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
व्हिडिओ नका करूया.
कर. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So, to all the listeners, we go back to our lecture series on behalf of the Visiting Professors Program and the Directorate in Goa University. I welcome all of you once again here for our second day of this series on the aspects of Nalanda tradition, the methodologies of inquiry, understanding the mind and its training, and the nature of consciousness. So I give the mic to Mr. Tashi Tsering and request him to start the lecture for today. So I hope all of you are tuned in. Dr. Anita is also here, Dr. Anita Dudane. Anita, can you come on the screen, please? Yes. Geshila, your voice is very clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want me to start, yeah?
Yes, you can start here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is our second session, second day. This started yesterday, and so yesterday I started to say the importance of the making sure our intention or the motivation to start the day or to start the event, whatever event that we are participating, that is something important which many Nalanda masters have shared that, and I repeated that many times. And another thing, a point that I started yesterday was importance of having a calm, clear, and focused mind, learning to or giving 5-6 minutes a day to build, to cultivate that kind of mental states. Our general, the mental states have that kind of quality, that kind of ability. So those two are something which I all the time I share with the people when I lead this kind of gathering. And this is, as I mentioned yesterday and before, again and again, these Nalanda great Indian masters have had emphasized to train ourselves, to train our minds, thoughts, and emotions to have these kind of mental qualities, regardless of whether we are following a particular spiritual traditions or not. As a human being, as having this mind and the body, and this mind which is extremely rich, sophisticated, complicated phenomena, which has tremendous impact in our daily lives. As we know from our own experiences, in my case now, approaching 63 years old, my well-being as a Tashi, well-being in day-to-day life, or as a Tashi's well-being, it is not just by this physical well-being, though that is very, very crucial. And it is also not, obviously not, the external materials that I have got, either, what you call the materials like clothes or shelter or all the other things, or, status, positions, whatever I have got. Of course, they will make difference to my life, but ultimately, my mental state, my, way of thinking, way of perceiving the world, outside world as well as inside world. It is very much my mental minds, thoughts, and emotions. They, how they interact internally and externally makes huge, huge difference to my daily life. Me to be a happy person or have a happy day, quite often, I think universally there is a expression, particularly in America, they say have a good day, or maybe also even in Australia, when you meet a person and when you say goodbye, have a good day, or when you write. Good day, whether we are going to have a good day or not, it is not entirely externally what we are going to encounter that day. It is our mental states, our thoughts and emotions, when they interact with the external things and events, makes almost 90%, the difference. Maybe 10% or 15% may make difference external conditions, external situations. And that is, we know from our own experiences. I remember, I will tell you one nice story. I think in 2002, after the 9/11 event, that time, the Pope John Paul II invited many of the world religious leaders, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, sometime in late autumn 2002. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama couldn't go because he wasn't very well. He was in Bodh Gaya and he wasn't very well. So his office asked me to go to represent His Holiness. Kindly gave me that opportunity, and I took that opportunity. And that was something. So not to take too much time to take the story there. So there were a few big banquets, huge dining tables and all sorts of. So the first evening, there were 3 days event. The main event was in just outside Rome, Assisi. And we traveled with the Pope John Paul II from the Vatican to Assisi by a special train. Within the Vatican, many of you may know or may not know, within the Vatican there is a small train station, and they arranged that special. Last 30-something years, that train station hasn't used, they said. So there were 5 or 6 carriages with the Pope John Paul II. We traveled together. That was the main day. But before that, the first day, we had the evening dinner. So dinner was really, of course, huge. All the things and all the drinks and everything's there. I didn't enjoy it that much because my mind was fully occupied. Tomorrow, the main, in the RCC, that I have to give a short talk, representing His Holiness Dalai Lama. I had this maybe 7 or 8 minutes, and need to say something in the world stage, which I never done that. Huge gathering. So my mind was fully occupied with that. And that dinner and next day breakfast were huge, but I didn't enjoy it that much. But then after the dinner, after the lunch, and when the event was finished, there was a simple lunch with the Pope John Paul II. There were maybe less than 20-something people, but it was quite simple lunch in RCC. I really, truly enjoyed the lunch. So that is really even the things which put on our table, delicious food, whether we enjoy or not, it has a tremendous, our mind plays a tremendous role. So that is here. My point here, what I'm making is, that these Nalanda masters, and of course many of ancient Indian spiritual masters, no doubt, in the other spiritual traditions, no doubt, they really truly have realized, understood the training the mind, really working with our thoughts, emotions, are really something important to make our lives rich, meaningful, to ourselves and to others. And that's why here, yesterday, we started talking about training the mind. And today I want to continue a little bit on that, which is, I feel, something important subject to share with the people. And it is one of the main the topics explained by these great Nalanda masters for centuries after centuries. So training the mind. And yesterday I touched on several points. The first one is importance of having some kind of strategy, how to train our mind. And in that, I made a few quotations from different Nalanda masters, and which is something important. And I just want to once again briefly to read, and just to remind ourselves, that I know I may have already said this in the university. Intellectual talks are given by the professors, and the lecturers. They don't, of course, they don't repeat again and again, because that is the what you call the way to how they deliver their lectures. I noticed when I was doing my MA in social anthropology, in London, I was very, amazed these lecturers, these professors, how they give their lectures. Really beautiful, without any repetition, without any, within a 45 to 50 minutes, almost 1 week topic is already given, just in a few sentences, bullet point and point after point, that's it. But in the traditional, like where I came from, and I think it is the same in Nalandas, when Nagarjuna and those great masters. I think these topics are repeated again and again for the students. Make sure followers, students, to fully to digest, not just in head level, but in a more practical level, in the heart level. So I have this habit, and some of you may not like it, hearing again and again, but I feel there is a positive element on that repeating. So I would just want to read one or two verses which I read yesterday, just to remind ourselves, what we had done yesterday. The first, I read those two verses from Shantideva's. Wicked people are as limitless as space. There's no possibility of conquering them. But if I conquer my mind of anger alone, it is like conquering all of my enemies. Where would enough leather be found to cover the entire surface of the earth? But if I put leather just on the soles of my shoes, it is like covering the whole surface of the earth. And those two verses really explains how to deal with the anger, jealousy, envy, attachment is not to make sure externally, things are okay. To deal with attachment, to get externally, to get all the materials that our attachment wants, to give it. Not in that way. It is dealing with our mind itself. If we deal with our mind itself, then we will not suffer with the attachment, grasping, craving, same as the anger, jealousy, envy. That's the strategy, which is something important. Another point which I made yesterday was, fully alert, fully aware of, these, unfortunately, these unhealthy mental states are very much part of currently, our mental states. Not all the time what's called inactive. Most of the time, more in a dormant, more in a the unconscious, or the masters, Nalanda masters may use the term in a form of propensity, seeds. But when conditions are met, immediately they arise. And externally there are these conditions, and internally we have those, the unhealthy emotions are there. And when these two are met, and that all the time being mindful, that is another strategy, important strategy to understand, to know. So that just to remind ourselves, yesterday, we mainly focus on that area, and then we move to talk about the Dhammakirtis, that saying when there is a self, there is another. There is a notion of another. In other words, these unhealthy, such as attachment, aversion, and jealousy, envy, so on and so forth, in these masters, like Vasubandhu counted 6 root afflictions and 20 secondary afflictions. They occur mainly, starting point or the ignition key to have these unhealthy mental state is not knowing correctly, precisely the I or the self, the notion of the I or the self. And that is also something, these Nalanda masters have, explain a lot, which we touch on that briefly. Okay. So now, today, we are going to move on that. And today's starting, the point is, again, I'm going to make one verse quotation from Chandakirti, Shantideva, same text, the engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, guide what you call the Bodhicharya Avatara in Sanskrit. And this verse is, some of you have had the opportunity to listen, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You may have heard many times. He quotes this verse very often, and it is something quite. On the one hand, to put into practice the meaning of that verse is not easy. But it is, the meaning of that verse can be put into practice in our daily lives to ease some of our mental difficulties. And the verse is this: if there is a remedy, what use is it to feel? Is it to feel upset? If there's no remedy, what use is it to feel upset? I'll read that. If there is a remedy, what use is it to feel upset? If there's no remedy, what use is it to feel upset? So that is, very simple verse. And this is also part of, the having some kind of strategy, which I mentioned yesterday, to deal with the challenges, problems, difficulties. The nature of our existence, this body, combination of this mind and body, that how we are built on. The nature of this existence and surrounding the environment and conditions are, inevitable. We are going to face challenges, difficulties. That is reality. Of course, we should and must try to minimize, to reduce challenges and difficulties individually, socially, and in the world level. But challenges bound to going to happen, and this is this understanding of the challenges and difficulties, problems, or if I use some of the commonly used Buddhist terms, dukkha, going to happen. As long as this mind and body is with us, these are going to happen. Now, that understanding itself is very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. It will give us, the what you call realistic aspect of our life. Many of our mental difficulties, fears, concerns, worries, suspicious, and so forth, are based on our unrealistic expectations in our life. Other day, just a few days ago, I talked to a young Tibetan girl. Maybe she might be in her 20s. I know her when I was in the UK. She was a student, and she used to come to the center where I was teaching. And as a young sort of learning to live this life, and with the modern technologies, as many of you know, what's happening in the teenage, particularly some of those very sad stories, committing suicide for just simply what people have said in their Facebook, what comment are given in their Facebook by their friends or enemies, whatever. And she was experiencing that challenges. And her mother, that I know very well, asked me to give her, some advice, because she was completely stressed out and so forth, not really going into quite deep depression. But there isn't that much magic solution to when the people go into that mental state. But when I listen, her challenges and difficulties, many of them are really based on very much her unrealistic expectation, expecting people will give her good comments, what she has been wearing, what she was putting on, and what she's doing, and so on and so forth. But in real world, that's not the case. So this unrealistic expectation that we have creates lots of unnecessary challenges, difficulties, individually and collectively. In the world stage, some of the world leaders, how they want to run their country with a very unrealistic expectations, and cause tremendous, huge numbers of people, and then up to the individual. So this, I think it is universal in the ancient Indian spiritual understanding. This, although philosophically may have slightly different. Otherwise, samsara, which is, talking about current nature of current existence that we have, individually and collectively. I want to tell you another short story. It was relatively early time when I was in the West, before I moved to London. That I was living in South France, and I used to go to Paris to give, to lead classes. There was a small center in Paris, and the center director very kindly, occasionally take me to outside to those big street, long, big, very rich stores. And one time she took me to a big store where the ground floor was full of, what you call the sand to put all the, the amazing smells, and one small bottle, which has put its name samsara. And it was labeled, the price tag was labeled, that time French franc, French franc, 500 French franc. It was just small, but it labeled it samsara. When I saw that, I was really, don't know what's the right word. So that is, so the point what I'm talking here raising is, these, the challenges, difficulties, problems, bounds to going to happen in our lives, individually and collectively. That understanding, that is the line, that is the fact, and how to deal with that, to have a realistic expectation. And in that, then here this verse is something very, meaning of this verse is something very useful, saying if there is a remedy to that challenges, difficulties that we face, then simply apply those remedies, those antidotes, those means and methods to reduce, to minimize the challenges and the difficulties. Instead of constantly, worrying and fear, concerns, and putting ourselves mentally in a very stressful situation, he's saying, then there's no point. There's no, no point to be, to get upset. Just apply the remedies or the antidotes or means and methods. Just sort it out. But then some challenges, the difficulties, problems, after we apply, the remedies, antidotes, and means and methods to solve the difficulties, some will constantly continue. Then, that moment, we need to think, what's the point me to being upset or getting, fear, concern, worries, because all the remedies, all the means and methods to solve those difficulties are applied, but difficulties, in different levels, different ways, keep coming. There's no reason, there's no point to get upset. This is also talking about bringing to the real world. It is saying sometimes no matter whatever we apply to solve the situation, there will be time, there will be a situation we cannot overcome. At that time, mentally not get upset, mentally not feel, guilt or whatever those, unhelpful mental states. So this verse is something, very helpful, very helpful. Although it is not saying, after applying the remedy or antidotes or the means and methods, when the challenges keep coming, problems keep coming, then give in. That's not the point. We never give in to solve the individual problems or the community problems. Constantly, continuously, to search different solutions, different means and methods. The point here is saying not to get upset, not to blame oneself, which is happening very often these days, particularly the teenage. So this verse, which is very very useful verse to think about meaning of that verse. As I mentioned, His Holiness Dalai Lama says very often. So then another important way to train our mind, is coming from another verse from different master, again a Nalanda master, the Arya Dev, I think 2nd or 3rd century Common Era master, in his 400 stanzas. Very, very nice text. It is mainly, commenting on Nagarjuna, his teacher Nagarjuna's, the text. So there's this nice verse in these 400 verses. It says this: just as a doctor does not get angry with an enraged person seized by demonic forces, the Buddha see mental afflictions as the enemy, not the person who has them. So there's nice analogy and us how to practice. So analogy here says, just as a doctor does not get angry with an enraged person seized by demonic forces. In other words, say that, psychologists or psychotherapists or psychiatrists, people who have mental difficulties. And these physicians, these doctors, when they see their patients who have mentally disturbed, and when they use very unpleasant words towards the doctors, towards the people who look after them, these trained people, psychiatrists or psychotherapists, these trained people, they will not get upset. Why? Because they understand the person is mentally unwell. So because they understand the person is mentally unwell, the person's action, either saying unpleasant words towards them, or even physically, doing some unpleasant things towards them, will not, cause them to upset because of their knowledge. I mean, we don't need to take a doctor or physicians as an example. Many of you you have family, children to upbring to children, and to upbring children, and you have, I'm sure many of you have experienced that. When you're the 2-3 years old child, walking around your dinner table, and somehow pull the what you call the table cover, and the entire precious china is on the floor. You may not get upset, although you may feel that's a big cost to replace entire sets of your china. But you will not get upset, because the who did it that is child, not understand the preciousness or the value of those. But the same thing is happened done by a adult, reaction will be very, very different. Why? Because this are mental states. Although the actual event is the same, consequences is same, but who done that? One is done, we say, by the toddler, hardly able to understand what's happened, and the other one is adult, understand, we expect he or she understand all the consequences. Our reaction is very different. And that is here, the next two lines, in this verse. Although here it says Buddha, but I would say the Buddhists see the mental afflictions as the enemy, not the person who has them. So that is here, which is something useful for us to think about. When we when we feel anger, hatred, and other things, or when somebody, out of their attachment, out of their anger, out of their jealousy, inflict pain and difficulty upon us, how to handle that situation. And that happens, unfortunately, that happens in our lives. Fortunately, not many of us, not that very often, but it happens. It happens. So therefore, how to handle that? And here, like this verse from Aryadev, and also later I was just going to quote another verse from Shantideva. They really talking about to understand the entire situation, not just the event itself. And this is what here, this verse is explaining to us. Those people who understand entire process of that he or she, inflict upon us pain and difficulties out of attachment, grasping, self-centered mind, hatred, anger, and then the actual event, actual actions. And when we understand the entire full picture, then, although the pain or loss when they inflicted upon us will be the same, but our reaction towards them will be different, as explained in the analogies. The physicians who understand, people who are mentally unwell. So, the mind training our mind to live this life peacefully, meaningfully, and constructively. What we need is to understand. We have to have a holistic, complete picture. Understanding of that complete picture, holistic understanding. Once we understand that, then that understanding can be applied to many other events that we face. We don't need to learn entire process to eat in every single event. And so therefore, this verse, by Aradev, very, very nice meaning is very, very nice. And I want to tell you, I may have already told here, to work with our minds, thoughts, and emotions. These, more than now, 2,000 years ago, these great Nalanda masters, their strategy and their way in which they, apply the antidotes or the solutions are very, very profound, not just taking the edge of the difficulties, but looking down the root, dealing with the root of the difficulties. I think I have already mentioned here, but I want to say again here. When I was relatively early in the West, after move from France to London, because there are many living in a big city. There are advantages and also disadvantages. The advantages are you have so many choice that you can do. So when I was there, I took several Western psychology courses, diploma courses, not further than that, just diploma, just 3 months like that. Twice in Jungian psychology, and 1 or 2 in Freud, and also 1 contemporary reason theory of, can't remember now. So they're all gone. So no doubt, they are extremely helpful. Particularly, what I was really amazed is how to listen others' difficulties, mental difficulties. One of the main, that I understood, I might be wrong, one of the main technique to really support people who are mentally suffering mental illness is just simply to learn to listen their challenges and difficulties. So the point what I want to make is, when people are suffering with rage or anger, and the banging the pillow as hard as possible, your own pillow is one of the methods. Initially, I thought how it works, but then after listening, it helps to reduce this energy of anger or hatred, just banging one's own pillow. But these are very temporary solution, looking at the very temporary, very surface edge of the difficulties. But these masters, Nalanda masters, their solutions are something long-term solution. What in the one of the expressions quite often you hear in English is game changer solution, because they are looking at the root, the where they are really coming from, not just the edge, not just the surface. So this is something very, very nice verse to, to meaning of that verse is very, very, powerful. I just want to read that verse again. Just as doctors does not get angry with an enraged person seized by demonic forces, the Buddhas see mental afflictions are the enemy, not the person who has them. And there's another which I will look at a little bit later. So now, these are the, so far, I have explained yesterday and today, really very much the general strategy, understanding how to, train our minds, thoughts, and emotions to have a peaceful, meaningful, constructive way of life. Now I want to move a little bit again, it's still in the mind training, but another step. And this one is more from the how to apply the antidotes, the applications. As His Holiness Dalai Lama says very often, and I'm sure he learned from these Nalanda great masters' teachings, as he often says. As you know, he says, my body is sustained since 1959. My body is sustained by Indian rice and dals, chapatis. And my brain, every single, cells in my brain is nurtured by Indian masters, knowledge. And I thought that was really beautiful. It's really beautiful how he put that. So now then, his Holiness says, that without acting, just the prayer alone will not go away, or even acknowledging their challenges, their difficulties, or even the understanding the strategy, all the detailed definitions, varieties, maps. Just understanding alone will not work, will not clear away those unhealthy mental states. What do we need to do? Actively, we need to apply the antidotes. And that is really something important to bear in mind. So, application, applying the antidotes. Now, by the nature of the mind, when the one side of the mental state is constantly what you call very much active, then other side of that mind cannot be function. There are two dichotomies. Many mental states cannot coexist, cannot co-function at one given time within our mental state or mental continuum. That is the precise term used by these great Indian masters. So, for example, hatred and love. Hatred to a person A and love to that person cannot coexist, cannot operate at the same time on a given same at the same time. So that really explains. That is the nature. That's not something these Nalanda masters or these great teachers created, but that's the nature of the mind, or even the nature of the the things and events. Two completely opposite, the side or the things cannot coexist. When when I was studying here in the monastery, there were 3 years, mainly the first 3 years, you need to learn. You need to learn the language of debating. Although the language is in Tibetan, but in the debating, the language that we use in the debating courtyard to debate this profound philosophy is not exactly same what we use in the common Tibetan, what's called in the community. For example, to say yes, no, agree, disagree are very, very different. Ordinary people who haven't learned to debate, they will not understand. Even those simple yes, no, agree, disagree, these are contradiction. And those simple, there were 8 answers and 8 questions. They will not understand what's really going on. So you have to spend 3 years to learn master the debating language, and also to learn some of the basic Buddhist what you call the philosophies. And one among them is learning the contradictions, direct contradictions, indirect contradictions. And there are some nice examples are used by these great teachers. One of the not exclusive contradictions, but contradiction cannot coexist at one place, at one given time. The analogy is charotang upa in Tibetan. That means crow and owls. Crow and owls, they cannot coexist together without fighting and without taking away one. Somehow they are very, very nice analogies, because young boys learning these things, and some of these analogies are very nice. And so this, the love and hatred cannot operate within our mental state in one given time. That is nature of the mind in this context. So understanding that is something very, very important step. If we really want to get rid of, if we really want to, if we really feel what you call the anger or hatred is very painful for somebody, anger and hatred is very painful, then we need to learn to love that person. If we learn to love that person, then anger or hatred will go away. We don't need to do any other things. Just genuinely to learn to love that person. Or if someone is suffering with the strong self-centered attitude, then learn to cherish others, to take care of others. That is the only way. That's the only way. So applying antidote to those unhelpful, unhealthy mental state is really very much to bringing, to cultivating, to enhancing opposite of that mental state. If oneself is suffering with the jealousy, envy of somebody's goods, somebody's positive things, then learn to really, appreciate their goodness, their good qualities. And that is really something, here these great Nalanda masters have said again and again and again and again. Of course, in our modern time, due to the advanced development of, the technologies, and learning more and more detail what is happening in our, neuro, world.
Nerves?
When we are
The nerves?
nerves, neuronerves, yes. So when we are suffering with the strong anger or strong, other mental difficulties, it may show some signs here and there, and then giving certain drugs, chemicals, may reduce that, the rage or that energy. But that is very, very simple solution, not long-term solution, as far as I know. Here, when I was doing again my MA dissertation and reading how the Massachusetts University, they accepted mindfulness quite early in 1980s, late 80s, early 90s. Mindfulness meditation is some form of solution for the depression, some of the mental illness. And one of the reasons, there's many datas and many research are done. One of the datas they use is brain scanning, what's happening in the brain when they do the meditation, mindfulness meditation. Yes, no doubt, they will help. But the actual, the antidote to really to solve the difficulty from, according to these Nalanda master, is really within our mental state, cultivating the actual mental antidote. Of course, people who are very much in the, deep depression, stress, may not get, may struggle to explain this, to apply these antidotes, because they are in a very much deep in that mental difficulties. So therefore, some of the immediate solution might be using some chemicals, I don't know. But for the, these masters, they are mainly talking about like general public, ordinary people, who are not at this worldly sense context, not labeled as a mentally ill, but from the I want to use the here from the Buddhist point of view, although it's a little bit depressing, but it's sometimes quite useful to say that from the Buddhist point of view, certain stage in our our mental state, is not fully, completely perfect. As I mentioned the other day, ignorance, hatred, and attachment are mental illness, although we may not recognize as a mental illness at this stage in a worldly sense. So anyway, so that is something that we, and learning to apply antidote, mental antidote, is the solutions taught by these great Indian masters, which is long-term solution, and there won't be any side effects. Many of the modern those medications, particularly to do a little bit, to help a little bit the brain, those nervous systems, to have less stress or less those very gross mental illness. They always have some kind of another side effects. So that is really something that we should think about, and this will lead to our next two what you call the talks tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Particularly how to apply those antidotes. Just if we learn one or two, what you call the strategy, how to apply, then the rest of the things are quite same. Slightly different mental afflictions. Otherwise, how to apply is quite same if we learn the art of that. Okay. Now then, another verse which I'm going to quote is from this great, another Nalanda master, Chandakirti, in his commentary on the 400 stanzas by Aryadeva, which I made a quotation earlier, a verse from Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, and Chandakirti, who was, I think, 7th century Common Era, wrote a nice commentary on that 400 verses, and there's this nice, the verse commentary on that. So, thinking the faults here is not sentient beings. The fault is the mental affliction. Wise ones who have thoroughly analyzed this do not get angry with the sentient beings. And that is almost exactly the same to the previous, that verse from the 400 stanza, and this is the commentary by Chandakirti. And that is something useful to know. And another verse, this one comes from Shantideva's, engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, very in the same vein, this one. If I become angry with the wielder, who directly employs the stick and so on, then since he is impelled only by hatred, at worst I should get angry with the hatred instead. And in the Shantideva's, sixth chapter, in having dialogue with the anger, this verse is from there, and a very, very nice dialogue, like having dialogue with the anger and patience or somebody to having. So this saying, for example, if somebody hits me and I feel pain in my body by a stick or whatever, the actual pain is inflicted by that weapon, by the stick or whatever. Even if, so that is the case. But we get angry to that person. And why? We have some sort of reason. Oh yeah, stick, used by this person. He or she used this weapon to inflict upon me pain. So I get angry with that person. Then if we take one step further, this is what the meaning of this verse. If we take one step further, that person who used that weapon to inflict pain, he or she is also under the power of hatred, anger, confusion, and so on and so forth. Quite often, people say that, don't they? When we hear, somebody inflicted major, pain to somebody, we say, oh, usually he or she is not like that person. He or she is very, very kind and calm and relaxed. What happened today? That is the clear sign saying the person is under the power of those afflictions, anger, jealousy, envy, attachment, fear, and then out of that, when the situation occurs, act, use weapon or other things. So if we look at process step by step by step, the person and the equipment, and if we look at further, then really those unhealthy mental states are the very much to be blamed, to us to have these difficulties. And these are something which, the useful, although, when we face the immediate challenges or the difficulties, this thinking process will not occur. And that is here the meaning of training comes, mind training comes. We need to train ourselves, we need to train our minds to have the ability, to do that, to think that way, when the actual situations, circumstances arise. If we don't train, and when the situation occurs, we are unable to handle the situation positively, constructively. And here, I want to conclude this, then we will have a question and answer. Here, it is not weakness, being able to do that. It is not weakness, it is the strength. Sometimes people feel these kind of trainings or these kind of statements are very much to be making oneself like a doormat. Whoever comes to to clean their feet, not like that. No. It is really cultivating mental strength and the actual sort of what you call the means and methods to help ourselves and help others. Okay, so now we are approaching to 4:45, and if there are questions, I would like to take.
Yes, we'll take the question and answers.
Yeah.
Yes,
Geshe-la.
Rita?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I will ask the first question that has come up on the panel from a student is that he says that you said, the student is saying, Geshe-la, you said that dukkha will be there as long as we have body and mind. So are you saying that we can get rid of mind?
Good question. Very good catch. That is really. So now, I may say, or I haven't said it, this mind and body. This mind and body, this mind, the mind that we have right here and now, it is very much, influenced, deep-rooted by the afflictions. But if I say the just mind, then it is slightly different. I may answer slightly different, particularly from the philosophical point of view. Philosophically, I may answer slightly different. But obviously, this body is definitely, as long as this body is with us, it bound to have difficulties, sufferings, and current mental state. As long as this current mental state is with us, yes. But if I say the general my mental state, and particularly some of the subtlest mental states, some of the Nalanda masters and Buddhist teachers talk about there is a degree of purity where there's no affliction or there's no, the distortions are reached or attached. There's a level of that, which we briefly talked about the last 2 or 3 sessions in the last month. So yes or no, direct answer is.
Okay, Geshe-la, another question is that when we say mindfulness, one way, of course, like you said, to be alert to our own faults or what we have in us. But is it also, does it include the property of remembering? For example, smriti, as the Sanskrit word smriti,
yes,
which is remembering how to apply maybe the antidote to the negative emotion that's coming.
Yes. I think the sati in Sanskrit, the sati, mind, mindfulness here. If you look at currently now we use the term mindfulness in early 20th century when these teachings are gradually translating into into English, when some of those Burmese meditation masters in collaboration with some of American, those days maybe hippies or a little bit earlier than hippies, when they are talking about Satipatthana Sutra, when they are trying to translate the exact term, the sati, mindfulness. They selected several different, English words, including memory, remembering, and tenpa in Tibetan. Tenpa. In Tibetan, tenpa is also, the remembering, your memory. So there are these connections, no doubt. So the what is here, which I'm going to talk a little bit that tomorrow and after tomorrow in that sense, mindfulness more detail. Some of the Nalanda masters, they gave a very, very simple definition, the mindfulness, tenpa. Tenpa. They use the term saying, in Tibetan, first I will say in Tibetan, tenpa ne mijibao. So that means, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness means non-forgetfulness, non-forgetting the subject, the topic, the events. That is mindfulness. Like what his name, Basubandhu, and also his brother, half-brother Asanga, they use this simple definition to define what is mindfulness. Just talk about the opposite of the mindfulness, that is not forgetfulness, not losing, not forgetting the subject or the topic, the events, holding it in our mind is the mindfulness. That's what they define. So whatever term that we use in a different language, in English or in German or in French, in Tibetan it is called tenpa. That is, mindfulness. Mindfulness. So it has a connotation of remembering. For example, in our daily what you call the conversation, we may ask, do you remember such and such things happened in that year? In Tibetan we say, ten so. So do you remember? So it is, memory, part of the memory, and part, memory in the sense not forgetting the event or the object or the topics. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe-la. There's one last question.
Yeah.
It says, how can we love our enemy? I find it very hard, the person says.
That is true. That is true. That is true. Particularly, when we use this term enemy, particularly, people who inflict pain and difficulties to the innocent children, innocent people. That is really, really difficult to express genuine love to these people. But, as I mentioned yesterday, our mind is extremely flexible. If we give the right information, if we really give the right information, right reasons not to feel hatred or anger towards those people, our mind, our feeling towards what the term that we call enemy will change. His Holiness Dalai Lama says very often, I think that's very, very, very valid one. Some of those community or neighbors, country big neighbors, they have to live together in that situation. Whether we hate to each other or love each other, we have to live together on this planet or different nations as a neighbor. So it is, one's own interest to live, not to have anger or hatred. And that's what we're talking about in the bigger picture. And in this individual one-to-one, the hatred or anger towards the person who inflict that pain or difficulty to the innocent people, that anger or hatred will not help at all the situation, to change the situation. Because as long as our mind is occupied by anger or hatred, there's no room to have wisdom, to solve the situation. If we really want to solve the situation, we need wisdom. So if we really feed or give the right information bit by bit, gradually our way of thinking towards that person will change. In practical, not easy. I agree with you, the person who put that question. Okay.
Thank you, Geshe-la. I think I'll pass it over to Dr. Savita Kek.
Yes. Thank you, Geshe-la, for such an informative talk. We learned today to love our enemies. We'll try very hard. It's difficult, but you've given us a beautiful solution to have a control over our mind. Yes. So thank you very much for this talk, and we'll meet tomorrow at the same time at 3:30. Thank you all for joining in for this talk, and I hope we have the same response tomorrow. So as a continuity, thank you, Dr. Anita Dudane, for participating and doing the question answer session. And thank you all once again. And stay safe at home with your mask and a sanitizer, of course, because the COVID situation is very bad now in Goa too. So, okay, I say thank you once again. And thank you, Geshe-la, again.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.